Episode 4 Disaster in the Wider Greek World. Poseidon and the other Olympians did not solely see Aliki as their playground. Instead, much of the wider Greek world experienced disasters, all of which shaped their very existence. The birthplace of democracy, the cradle of Western civilization, and one of the most famous centers of Hellenic existence, Athens herself became shaped by disaster both physically and spiritually. In this, Athens and Aliki were far from alone, with much of the wider Greek world experiencing similar disaster events, which left long legacies in the cults and culture of their development. In Athens, the most prominent form of disaster legacy and cultic activity was the custom of Bouphonia. As a part of the festival of Zeus Boreas, an Athenian Zeus cult, the act of a first killing of an ox by a priest of the cult is remembered. An important aspect of this ritual is the specific memory of a natural disaster being tied to the death of the animal, sent down by Zeus himself to punish the priest for killing the animal. While this event is brought to us by a biased author, Porphyry of Tyre, relaying the event as evidence against the killing of animals, it is nonetheless evidence that Athenians tied disasters not only to gods, but to impiety, as had occurred in Aliki. Just across the Gulf of Corinth from the Alikians sat the most famous Greek pilgrimage site, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Tucked into the range of Mount Parnassus, the temple featured a woman oracle known as the Pythia, who is said to be the direct mouthpiece of Apollo himself. This oracle became, without a doubt, the most famous oracle in the Greek world, attracting thousands of visitors, including nobles and royalty, even a young Alexander the Great himself. In operation since the Bronze Age, the Pythia's responsibilities and duties were many and varied. Amongst policy approval and direction of war, one of the Pythia's main roles was to advise on both man-made and natural disaster. Instances of flooding, earthquakes, famine, plague, and other disasters are found 42 times in the preserved 205 occasions for consultation, which constitute over 20% of the reasons for visitations. Therefore, disasters constituted a significant part of the fame and reputation of the Pythia, making up 20% of her visitations from our sample size. In folklore and allegory, disaster was just as significant a factor as any human-driven event. One of the more famous legends is Plato's Atlantis, written within a couple decades of Aliki's famous 373 BCE destruction, an event that Plato would have almost certainly been aware of due to the prevalence of the city-state and events surrounding its destruction. In Plato's works Timaeus and Critias, he outlines the devastation of a presumably fictional island of Atlantis, which now, quote, lies sunk by earthquakes and has created a barrier of impassable mud. The island was, similarly to Aliki, furnished with a massive and beautiful temple and sacred grove to Poseidon, and was finally destroyed by Zeus himself for the population turning to greed and sacrilege despite the gifts bestowed upon them by Poseidon. Many parallels can be drawn between the allegory of Atlantis and the reality of Aliki, but whether or not they are truly the same is not essential. The ways in which even the educated of ancient Greece saw these events unfolding present to us key perspectives in the ancient world, and one of deep uncertainty brought about by the frequency of disaster. These fears are as reflected in the way ancient Greeks lived, as well as in what they believed. Across the Greek world, disaster shaped the way in which settlement patterns unfolded. For our friends at Aliki, settlement would move back and forth between the steeper slopes of the hillside and the coastal regions by the lagoon, depending on the frequency or time of seismic activity in the region. Even when the Alikians chose to settle closer to either the rivers which bounded the Aliki plain in or the lagoon which provided access to the sea, the foundations of their homes and industry were built upon tall stone footings which would allow for the passing of floods and mud flows without damaging the mud brick superstructure. The masonry of these foundations were often sturdier than buildings found in less seismically active regions, thus demonstrating a resilience to and memory of seismic events. Similar disaster architecture can be found elsewhere. In Athens, the famous Athenian agora was reinforced by a massive drainage system in the 6th century BCE to redirect floodwater from the open area where some of the most important economic activity in Athens was conducted. Similar hydrological adaptations were made in the city-state of Elysia in western Greece, whereby a large stone dam was created with a spillway to protect Elysia's plains from flooding events. Rather than just accept their divine fate, the Greeks recognized the environmental hazards and responded appropriately with well-engineered infrastructure to mitigate the loss of lives and livelihoods. Still now, these city-states face environmental threats on a scale the original inhabitants likely could have never imagined. A number of ancient cultural heritage sites have become threatened by recent anthropogenic climate change, with rising sea levels threatening to consume coastal cities as fires sweep across vast plains in Greece, damaging structures which have stood the test of time for millennia. An example of this would be Messini, whereby flood adaptations are being considered in order to protect the site from severe flooding events which are growing more frequent by the year. These delicate archaeological sites are both incredibly important cultural sites, as well as useful learning tools to gain insights into the ways in which these ancient peoples lived and strove to survive in a world which was often extremely hostile towards them. Elysia's inhabitants were people, just like you or I. They believed in things the same way we do, and they held fears in the same way we do. Just because the sources of those beliefs have changed does not mean they weigh on us any differently. As we face imminent climate collapse, famines, death, and disaster, we view the future as one that is as uncertain as those who lived over 2,000 years ago. Not only do we have the duty to respect the memories of those who came before us and believed in living enough to give us life, we also have the benefit to study their lives and histories, left behind in packed earth, tucked away under crumbling walls, and offering us a glimpse into our own futures, facing many of the same fears and realities. We would do well not to forget and discard humanity's history, but rather to look at it as our ancestors did, and glean from their wisdom and lived experiences what our future may hold. I would like to briefly take a moment to thank those who made this project possible. First would be Dr. Dora Katsanopoulou and my colleagues who I had the great pleasure to work with in the conservation and excavation of the site of ancient Aliki. Dr. Katsanopoulou's articles made up a significant portion of the research which laid the foundation of my work here. Secondly, I'd like to thank Dr. James Merriweather and my capstone peers for creating such a supportive environment over the past semester of creating this project. Finally, I would like to extend my thanks to my family and friends who have been enormously supportive, patient, and kind as I have worked to create this project and finally graduate after years of hard work. I could not have created this project, of which I am immensely proud, without their unwavering support and generosity. Thank you all for listening, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or night.